Diolch yn fawr iawn, and a great thanks to my neighbour from the Gower for that excellent speech, and indeed thank you to my other neighbour in Swansea East for introducing this great St David's Day debate. And I'd also like to actually thank the member for Ceredigion, partly because my father is from Ceredigion, I'm from Aberystwyth, and that's part of the family goes back, in fact, through my man Guy to Henry Richard. And on my mother's side, Betty, the family's been in Swansea for 5 generations. I'd like to use this opportunity just to mention Betty Boothroyd, actually, at this point, because when I was first elected to this place in 1997, and I'm the longest-serving member in here other than you, Mr. Chair, Betty Boothroyd, in fact, shortly after gave me an autobiography signed for my mother, saying, "From one Betty to another, keep your son in order." And she was very happy about that. And Betty Boothroyd, as you'll know, Mr. Evans, Deputy Speaker, is a great authority and a very warm person, and a fantastic tribute to this House. But moving forward, in talking about Wales, I mean, obviously we're all proud of Wales and what Wales has done and the opportunities ahead of Wales. But I think we all respect in here as well that Wales has been particularly hard hit by years of austerity and our cost of living crisis, with inflationary crisis, with a backstop of people who are, on average, poorer, older and sicker than the rest of the UK. And the gross value added on average, the average earnings in Wales is only like 73% of the UK average, compared to, for instance, Scotland, which is 93% of the UK average. And because of that, we get a sort of Barnet consequential of £1.20 instead of £1 for the services that are provided. Incidentally, Scotland gets £1.26, even though obviously they're richer. And what has happened in Wales in recent years, in the last 13 years in particular, is that the austerity has hit hard on public services, on jobs, on benefits. And it really has hit Wales disproportionately hard. And I do credit the work that's been done in various constituencies to help the poorest in need. And obviously we've seen this amazing emergence of food banks, and I regret the normalisation of food banks. We're in a country now that, across UK now, that 1 in 4 people are in food security, and that's not a place we should be. We do really need to think again how we can move forward from the situation. There's been some complaints from the member for Delyn about the health service. It's worth mentioning that the cost of treating people who are malnourished through poverty is 3 times as much as it costs to treat someone who's well nourished. And so we've got a situation in Wales where the health service is facing more people and costing more to treat them because of the level of austerity that's been inflicted. Other members, like the member for Avon, has mentioned, the need for a proper windfall tax to try and get people to get the country back on track. And I think it's very important to remember that we do need to get our fair share of investment in Wales. And the truth is, on rail investment, which is something I again mentioned this morning in transport questions, is that unlike Scotland, unlike Northern Ireland, we're not getting so-called population Barnet share of the HS2 money, which has now gone up to something like £100 billion estimated cost, which actually works out at £3,500 for every household in the UK. It's an amazingly high cost we need to think about, which is a north-south spinal route, which will obviously, by way of example, reduce the time it takes to get from London to Manchester from 2 hours 10 to 1 hour 10. Well, it still takes 3 hours to get to Swansea. So it will, of course, displace investment from South Wales in particular to Manchester and elsewhere, and yet we're not getting any Barnet consequential, which would be and should be a £5 billion. But we're not getting that. And indeed, this is on the back of something like 20 years of us getting 1.5% of the UK rail enhancement investment over time for 5% of the population and 11% of the rail lines. And it is time that the government stood back and actually looked to give us some money so that we can modernise, we can electrify, we can increase productivity and the wealth and health of the nation in that respect. And it is the case, as I pointed out earlier this morning, that Transport for Wales have now actually generated shovel-ready schemes of £2.5 billion to be delivered over the next 15 years that are ready to go. And I was calling on the government, and I hope the Secretary of State will support me in this, that the Department of Transport should work with the Transport for Wales to work out how to work together and indeed co-fund shovel-ready projects to move them forward sooner rather than later, because we want to increase productivity, we want wages to go up, we want to deliver a net zero, and that's vitally important. I will.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. He's making very, very important points about rail infrastructure. You'll know I've long-standing campaigned for St Mellons Parkway to be built in the east of Cardiff, and of course we've got some crucial funding now from the Levelling Up Fund to create an essential link in the centre of Cardiff. But one thing I heard again and again from businesses is about those rail links to Manchester, to Birmingham, to Leeds, to Liverpool, to help grow their businesses and their opportunities. And for that, they need the investment from the UK government in those lines across into Wales. Brandon.
Yes, I do agree with that, and I'd go further and say one of the things we do need to look at, and specifically in South Wales, is the link between Swansea, Cardiff and Bristol, which is basically a regional economy, and obviously it's part of the union, it goes outside Wales, of 3 million people, and we only get about one service an hour. When you compare that with Manchester Leeds, it's something like 8 services an hour. So there's a lot of talk about the Northern Powerhouse. We need a linkage in Wales and in South Wales and the West to actually make that hub work, rather than everything having to go out of London. We should have localised economic prosperity in that way. So we do. What the point I'm trying to make here is that we need to alleviate poor health and low wealth through investment in infrastructure. We also need to invest in research and development and a green future. And again, I raised this earlier this morning, we're now in a situation, Mr. Chair, that we're now in a situation where we're at a cliff edge, where in Wales we face the loss of 1,000 jobs in universities from 60 projects that are focused on generating green growth in the future, because structural funding from the EU is suddenly coming to an end, and the Shared Prosperity Fund is delivered through local authorities and isn't centrally divided across the UK as it has been with the structural funds to universities to fire up new green projects. And the sort of things we're talking about, and Member for Aberavon mentioned one of them, which was the cladding of homes that create their own power stations. There's also projects where we take, we dig up plastic from plastic waste landfill, and convert that into carbon nanotubes for using in electric car batteries, for using in medical instruments and in mobile phones. There's projects to convert slag heaps from steel works that are billions of pounds of liabilities into billions of pounds of assets by a simple process using water that converts them into iron ore, zinc and hydrogen. There's projects that take off-peak renewable energy, the renewable energy that isn't going in at breakfast time and tea time into the grid, take the energy that's currently not being used and convert that into hydrogen and put that into the gas grid, for instance, or into hydrogen transport. So there's all these cutting-edge projects that are suddenly going to end unless we get bridge funding, in particular for Welsh universities, £71 million, or across the UK of £170 million for 166 projects. And again, this was highlighted again in the Financial Times. And I do hope the Chancellor will stop these projects collapsing. This is R&D vital for future green growth and exports, and that the Secretary of State will urge him to provide the bridging funding so we can move forward. There's a lot more we could be urging the government to do, whether it's carbon border tax, to ensure that if we do get this steel in Port Talbot and elsewhere to be through arc furnaces, so it's got less carbon intensive, that imports from China and elsewhere, which are carbon intensive, pay a tax, as will happen in the EU, because otherwise we'll end up with a situation we'll be substituting clean South Walian steel for dirty Chinese steel. I do hope also that following the good news, in my view, of the Windsor framework, recognising and acknowledging the opportunities for Northern Ireland to link into the single market and to trade with the United Kingdom, that trade from Wales to Northern Ireland and from Wales to Ireland is facilitated through more, again, rail infrastructure, so that we ensure our economy is vibrant and there isn't simply businesses moving from Wales into Northern Ireland itself. So I very much hope that we can get back on track. We are in an awful place. There has been a normalisation of food banks. It is the case that food banks are meant to be one-off crisis points, but increasingly people are now dependent on food pantries and other facilities for ongoing food. We need to move from that position by investing in transport, by investing in our prosperity and our productivity, to a situation where there's less strain on the health service, where you can be strong again, and that requires investment across the piece, so as a union, as a nation, we can be strong again for the future. Happy St. David's Day.